Hello there, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Welcome back to World Energy Week Live 2021. We're absolutely delighted to have you all here. I'm Ethno Trainer. I'm going to be your moderator for the morning, so it's great to be with you. And for all of you joining from all around the world, it's early in some areas, it's getting later in others, but we're really, really happy to have you on board. And what a great opening day we had. I mean, it was action-packed, it was content-led, really, really fabulous day. I think we started off there with that great certainty of uncertainty, and that really set the pace for what was going on. The energy industry in Central Asia, we took a look at that, really looking at the initiatives and partnerships that are going on around the world. The circular carbon economy, again, particularly in the Middle East. It was great to have an opportunity to examine that in a little bit of detail. From Kazakhstan, then really looking at the energy transition in terms of what's happening in the region. The rise of machines and the digital customer, I think that was just fascinating. All of these, I'll have to go back myself and look at some of them, which of course, I'm sure you'll be very, very interested too. Looking at challenges in transportation from the US. And again, ultimately, our big panel yesterday afternoon on humanizing energy, meeting the enablers in the transition. I mean, that was just day one. And today we have so much to look forward to. So I'm really, really delighted to have you here. We have, as I said, a full schedule for today and indeed tomorrow. A lot going on here. The World Energy Week 2021, hosted by the Ministry of Energy in Kazakhstan. So we're absolutely delighted to have all of our colleagues on board there. And of course, the support of Kaz Energy Association. The Kaz Energy Association is the member committee for the World Energy Council. So all of our colleagues there, warm welcome to all of you. It's great to have everybody on board. And we're going to hear more from many of our colleagues there shortly. Now, we have so much to cover. We have a lot of online content. We have people in studios. So we're doing a tremendously hybrid event, I think, which you're all finding interesting from the feedback we're getting. So please, please keep giving us that feedback. It's so lovely to hear where you're viewing from. And again, we hope to get some questions in for many of our panels. So keep in touch with us. We still have 2 days to go. So lots of questions we can actually get to answer you. Of course, this is part of the World Energy Council. And what do we do with the World Energy Council? This is all about humanizing energy. So we're going to hear that thread coming from time to time, because ultimately it's what it's about. It's customers, it's producers, it's consumers. It's really the impact that energy is making on our world and how important it is. We're going to examine so many more areas to future fuels, hydrogen, sustainable finance, access to energy, human stories, of course, being at the very center of what we do on World Energy Week. So it's really, really important that you stay with us, keep an eye on what's going on, and stay connected. Now, of course, because you're on the platform, I'm hoping you know exactly how to use it. But please familiarize yourself with this platform. It's got a few little areas. It's the hopping platform. So it's, the sidebar is there on the left of your screen. Just again, navigate around it. It's a really dynamic platform. This is going to be a great digital event for all of you looking on it. You have the menu on the right-hand side of your screen there. So just take your time to have a look around. And I know from everybody who was on yesterday, you figured it out pretty quick. And I think we're getting used to how to use these platforms. But this one particularly has some lovely features, the way you can engage. And look at the chat box there. And also see who else is at the event. So check that people tab there and have a look. And of course, we do want you to engage. Our job is definitely to inform, to educate, and inspire, but we do, of course, want to make sure that we engage with you. And we're also going to be available on LinkedIn, so keep an eye on that, and indeed on Twitter. So you have no excuse, but you can find us, right around social media. We're here on this digital platform, and we're absolutely delighted to be able to bring you World Energy Week. Now, hashtag, of course, World Energy Week. So we'd love to have you tagging us around the world. And again, it's a real unique opportunity to engage with us. Now, today, we have lots going on. We're going to be looking at the role of future fuels in just a few minutes. We're also going to take a regional perspective, looking really around Asia and also at Asia Pacific in terms of what's going on there. We're going to have a really in-depth look at the role of gas in the energy transition. And I know we've heard a lot about that at different platforms and on different fora throughout, the last while. And indeed, I think, we're looking at this as the topic for Q4. We have a full quarter of the year to go on. We have a lot happening, and it's great to be back in contact with everybody. And of course, we will be looking at hydrogen as well. So an action-packed rundown for you today. So much to stay tuned for, and many of my colleagues coming, and they'll be presenting many of the big panels. And of course, we have a stellar lineup of experts that are really going to be here, to engage and to inform you. So we want to get this started. I know that's what you're all waiting for. And our first session of the day is going to be about future fuels, looking particularly at that regional perspective, as I said, Asia and Asia Pacific. And we're joined now, which I'm absolutely delighted to hand it over to the Executive Director, the New Zealand Member Committee of the World Energy Council. So moderating this session for us, I'm going to hand it over now to Tina Schirr. Tina, over to you.
Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Tina Schirr. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Energy Council here in New Zealand, which is the World Energy Council Member Committee here in New Zealand. It's my great pleasure to be your host for tonight and also your moderator of today's Asia Pacific session on future fuels for decarbonization. I'm delighted to be joined by our experts from Japan, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and New Zealand as we explore the different types of fuels across the Asia Pacific region, as well as the opportunities and challenges on our way to a low carbon economy. Too often our conversations focusing on supply and ignoring the role of users. But discussions must explore what's needed to trigger demand with a specific focus on the development on infrastructure and the global supply chain. So today's discussion will therefore focus on future fuel business models and how whole value chains can be created. We will also investigate how future fuels might be impacting energy security and assist us to future-proof our energy system. Part of this will be sharing insights on how we might overcome some of the barriers on our way to the wider implementation of those new clean fuels. With me today is Dr. Ken Cuyama. He is the Chief Economist and Senior Managing Director at the Institute of Energy Economics of Japan. Dr. Koyama has served as a member of energy policy-related advisor councils and committees of Japanese government on many occasions. He has extensive experience in energy economics and is specialized in the field of research, which includes energy security issues, the geopolitics of energy, as well as the global energy market and policy issues, with the emphasis on the Asia-Pacific region. He says the session is extremely important as energy transition in the Asia-Pacific region, a gravity center of the world energy market, will face several challenges and opportunities for stakeholders in the regional and global energy market. With me is also Alex Huey. He is the Deputy Chair of Energy at the Asean Federation of Engineering Organization, AFEO, in Malaysia. He is also an IEEJ International Electrotechnical Commission Young Energy professional working to revolutionize the electrotechnical standardization for global trade and value chains in the engineering technology. He says the focus on renewable energy requires coordinated and collaborative action from all relevant stakeholders and government agencies to tackle long-term environmental impacts of coal-fired power plant generation, increasing greenhouse gas emission, and the effect of climate change. Who's also joining me tonight is Richard Lancaster. He is the CEO of CLP Holdings, the parent company of CLP Group, which is one of the largest investor operators in the electricity industry throughout Asia Pacific region. Prior to his role, Mr. Lancaster was the managing director of CLP Power Hong Kong for 3 years, responsible for its electricity generation, transmission, distribution business, and services to its customers in Hong Kong. Mr. Lancaster has more than 30-year experience in the power industry and other industry operations in Australia, the UK, and Hong Kong. And he says, with growing urgency to mitigate climate change, it's clear that a net zero economy will need to run on both carbon-free electricity and fuels. And last but not least, back to New Zealand. Today with me, Andrew Clennett. He is the co-founder and CEO of Hiringa Energy, a company actively developing green hydrogen infrastructure across New Zealand and Australia, including one of the world's first nationwide green refueling networks. He has over 25 years of international experience in the energy sector, having held several senior management and executive roles in multinational energy companies. And he says, the Asia regional session today is a tremendous opportunity for the energy sector to bring the conversation around carbon neutrality across the Asia Pacific region to the forefront. We are all faced with addressing these global climate change challenges with a local and a regional lens, and working together to ensure we can achieve aligned goals is vital. So now, before we get into the discussion and the main meaty part of today, I would like to invite all speakers to please provide me with initial comments at the beginning. And we would like to start tonight with Dr. Ken Cuyama from Japan.
Tina, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I'm very happy to join this great panel to discuss that very important topic with my fellow panelists. Yes, now we in Japan are now in the midst of the great energy transition toward carbon neutrality in the year 2050. And to realize this ambitious target, the government of Japan and the Japanese industry and the Japanese citizens are seriously discussing on revising the strategic energy plan of Japan, which is the most fundamental energy policy document for the long-term vision for Japan. And not only the carbon neutrality in the year 2050, we have another very ambitious target of deep GHG reduction in the year 2030. The previous strategic energy plan has a target to reduce GHG by 26% in 2030, but now we are aiming at 46% reduction. And to meet both ambitious target, 46% reduction in the year 2030 and carbon neutrality in the 2050, we need a clean energy source like renewable and CO2-free energy source like nuclear power. And also we need to have the contribution from innovative technologies such as CO2-free and ammonia. And also we need some negative emission technology. But anyway, we have to depend on the great effort, Japanese society's effort to accomplish this very challenging target of deep GHG reduction. But at the same time, we need to enhance energy security and protect our economy. That's a very important task, and I'm very happy to discuss this topic with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ken Cuyama. That's very exciting times for Japan from what it sounds like. I would like to now hand over to Richard Lancaster for some initial statements.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you to the World Energy Council for this opportunity to join such a distinguished panel this afternoon. Hong Kong has its own interesting and unique challenges when it comes to decarbonization. I think one thing we have in common with everybody else is that we have also set a decarbonization target to be carbon neutral by 2050. So the end game is the same for all of us. We all have to be aiming for net zero carbon. The way that we get there, I think, will involve some very unique solutions. Hong Kong has a population of around 7 million. That is one of the most densely populated cities on the planet. We don't have access to the same resources that other economies have. In fact, Hong Kong is 100% dependent on imported energy. We also don't have the land for renewable energy. Energy security is absolutely vital for our economy. Our population live in high-rise buildings, and if the lifts don't work, people can't get to their homes and can't get to work. So the energy transition has to be carefully managed, carefully planned. We have to have energy security and reliability of our electricity supply, first and foremost in our minds. And we have to introduce some innovative solutions in our journey to decarbonization.
Thank you, Richard Lancaster. Actually, in New Zealand, we're facing quite similar challenges when it comes now to energy security and affordability. And it's always really important to look through a balanced approach for the energy trilemma. Therefore, we have actually probably all more problems in common than we think. I would like to now hand over to Alex Huey for his initial statements.
Okay, thank you very much, Tina, for the kind introduction, and thank you, World Energy Council, for the invitation to participate in this panel discussion together with expert panelists. Okay, so one of the things that I would like to introduce is that I'm quoting the CEO of Energy Commission, Mr. Abdul Razif. Managing the energy trilemma under the long-term supply outlook, the government has to look into several policies and planning criteria. And the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely provided additional challenges to our country in terms of planning for the electricity supply industry, as well as it has also impacted the overall demand growth and also the challenges in forecasting the electricity demand. And we have also pledged under the Ministry of Energy to increase the renewable energy share from 22% up to 31% by 2025. And this new capacity generated has to go through competitive bidding in order to achieve optimum costs, which will translate into a more affordable tariff rate to consumers. So we have also pledged that the carbon emission intensity per GDP is projected to be on the downward trend with 45% reduction by 2030 and to increase 30% of solar penetration by 2029. But we all know that solar has an intermittency issue. And therefore, the government has also tasked the grid system operator, the GSO unit, to conduct study to assess the solar penetration limits and also possible impacts to the grid stability. And we are also looking into reducing dependency on coal-fired power plants and also increasing 8% of energy efficiency savings by 2025. So if you look at the total energy mix in Malaysia, we have coal and gas representing 39% and 37% respectively. And the major contribution of RE is actually large hydro, representing about close to 18%. The rest are solar at 3%, bioenergy comprising of biomass and biogas, 0.5%, and mini hydro, 0.2%. So currently, if you look at the total renewable energy mix, including large hydro, we are at 22.2%. So we are not very far from our actual target to reach 31%. So we are currently in the large-scale solar fourth cycle, where we have awarded 823 megawatt out of 1,000 megawatt, where the lowest bid is 0.17 cent per kilowatt hour in ringgit Malaysia. Converting it to US dollars is 0.043 US dollars per kilowatt hour. However, this is also another cause of intermittent energy source, or we call it variable renewable energy. Therefore, we are also looking into biogas and biomass as part of the bioenergy sector, which is also abundant, but challenges to get the right mechanism and also incentive in place. So I'm looking forward to have a productive panel discussion in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just reconfirm, did you say Malaysia is wanting to increase its renewable energy or renewable electricity share by 25 to 31%?
Renewable energy share.
Renewable energy share. Thank you. I would like now to hand over to Andrew Clennett, basically going back to New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Tina, and thank you very much to everyone on the panel for joining today. Yeah, in New Zealand, as Tina's pointed out, we have very common challenges for energy, but we also have some unique features. New Zealand is very fortunate. We have a very high degree of renewable electricity in the system. About 85%, 80 to 85% of our electricity system is renewable, but that actually only makes up around 40% of our total energy system, because we import a lot of fossil fuels and we produce fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas in New Zealand as well. But we are very fortunate to have a plethora of renewable energy sources. We have a high degree of hydro, that's by far the majority, 6% of the electricity system. And then we have wind and geothermal make up the large bulk of the other areas in electricity, and then with thermal coal and thermal gas being applied for filling out our remaining needs. So what the country's done is set some fairly bold targets to go into 100% renewable electricity by 2030, which is no doubt, as you can imagine, people in the forum, is a real challenge. At the same time, we've also committed as a country to the 2050 goals of carbon neutrality. And a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, a lot of regions are really focusing on achieving those goals, that net goal, so that we can really address our energy system and not just the electricity system. It's recognised that there's a lot more electrification that's going to need to have a role to play in the systems, but for example, other technologies, other fuels are coming into the mix, and that includes hydrogen, which is what our company focuses on. We use our expertise from the oil and gas sector with clean tech sectors. Hydrogen and green hydrogen has a really big role to play, and biofuels is going to have a role to play in fuels going forward. So the challenge for New Zealand is we can only really easily address some of our emissions, because a huge proportion, a very large proportion, in fact almost 50% of our emissions come from agriculture. We're an agri-economy, and so we're really only able to talk about, when we talk about conventional industrial countries and where we can address emissions, we really have to spend a lot of time focusing on the conventional methods versus agriculture, which puts a challenge for New Zealand because we have committed to those numbers. So there's a task ahead.
Indeed. Nothing is without challenges, looking towards how do we actually address climate change. But we need to get started, and this session is probably one step forward to actually address some of the solutions that we currently looking at. I would like to start with my first question for tonight, and that is all about the sort of types of future fuels we're looking into. So my first question is, what future fuels have the greatest potential in the context of your country, and are there any possible business models or ways to create value chains within your country and actually also globally? And this question goes to everyone. So let's start with Ken Cuyama.
Once again, thank you very much for asking a very important question. As I mentioned earlier, that if we are now truly aiming at achieving the carbon neutrality and in the end. And to do that, I think that every possible and available option need to be employed. And which means that, of course, we have to further develop that renewable energy, solar power, and from now on, we are expecting that the great contribution from that offshore wind power. And also we will depend on some contribution from nuclear power, which is a very important energy source for Japan, with the security enhancement, and also that the public acceptance need to be secured. But at the same time, we will rely on some innovative technology like CO2-free hydrogen and ammonia. And the discussion at the government-specific energy advisory council highlight the potential importance of CO2-free ammonia and CO2-free hydrogen. Of course, everybody knows that CO2 hydrogen can be produced by many ways, like green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, yellow hydrogen. And in case of Japan, we are paying a great attention to the contribution from the blue hydrogen based on the fossil fuel with CCS technology or CCUS technology. And to realize this potential, we pay great attention to the potential international cooperation with important resource-rich countries like Middle East, Saudi Arabia, or UAE, Australia, and Canada, Russia, and to develop the kind of international supply chain of CO2-free hydrogen or CO2-free ammonia. But of course, the cost is the main issue, and infrastructure development remains a very hard task. And that's why we are aiming at firstly the CO2-free ammonia as a great first step towards building the ultimate goal of the hydrogen society. And we are working very hard together with the various government of other countries, resource-rich countries, and international energy company and international stakeholders.
Thank you, Dr. Ken Cuyama. I would like to hand over to Richard Lancaster to now comment and add to the conversation. How does that look like in Hong Kong?
Thank you, Tina. We have some interesting challenges in Hong Kong when it comes to our choices for zero carbon fuels. Obviously, if we can decarbonize our electricity sector, and given that Hong Kong's economy has relatively little industry, the primary source of carbon emissions is the electricity sector. So number one, the most important thing we can do is to decarbonize our electricity sector. That will eliminate 65% of Hong Kong's emissions. The next biggest sector is the transport sector. And if we can use carbon-free electricity as a source for our transportation sector, then we can solve another 18%. That takes us to 83% of our economy can be decarbonized just through the decarbonization of our electricity sector. Now, as I was outlining earlier, that the choices we have are limited given the geography of Hong Kong. Clearly, we don't have sufficient land for renewable energy. So our renewable energy will have to be utilizing offshore wind technology as much as we feasibly can. We are situated in a part of the world where the wind doesn't blow all that strongly. So it will only be a relatively small part of our energy mix, but we need to do as much as we can using available renewable resources. We have launched a feed-in tariff scheme, which has been very successful in Hong Kong, that is now seeing solar panels being put on rooftops throughout the territory. But again, this is only going to be small. If you could imagine a solar panel the size of the entire land area of Hong Kong, it still wouldn't be enough to meet our energy needs. So renewable energy is going to be an important but small part of our energy mix. Over the past 20 years, we have been using carbon-free technology from nuclear power, from a power station that was developed in the 1990s, about 60 kilometers from Hong Kong in Guangdong province in China. And with China's expansion of its nuclear fleet, we have opportunities to bring more nuclear power into our energy mix in Hong Kong. So that is a second important pillar of our energy mix. The third piece is the use of natural gas. We currently have around 50% of our power generated from natural gas. And in our view, a shift from natural gas to green hydrogen will be a nice way to diversify our energy sources, give us 3 carbon-free sources of energy, which gives us a large comfort on energy security, and also managing the variability of renewable energy. So green hydrogen we see as being a third pillar in our energy mix. Now, as Ken Cuyama has already outlined, there are various ways that hydrogen can be produced. Some of them are still carbon intensive and some are not. But producing hydrogen from renewable energy, the term that's commonly used is green hydrogen, is, we believe, to be a very sensible part of Hong Kong's energy mix.
Thank you, Richard Lancaster. I just want to now to comment, get a comment from Andrew Clennett. I will come back to you, Mr. Huey, but he mentioned, Richard Lancaster mentioned something around offshore wind and the production of hydrogen. And I know that Andrew Clennett has probably some good insights to share. So I hand over to Andrew Clennett for now, and then come back to you, Mr. Huey.
Great. So yeah, no, thanks, Tina. And it's an interesting dilemma that we have as we know the energies that we want. If we know we need a higher proportion of renewable energies in our energy mix across Asia Pacific, and yet we have some countries that are maybe more renewable energy rich and some that are more renewable energy poor. So the ability for countries such as New Zealand to be able to create green hydrogen, for example, on scale, does create some great potential, both for decarbonising New Zealand, but also for becoming an export medium and a means to help decarbonise countries and cities such as Hong Kong. So that's something that we have looked hard at as a country. We've looked at this also as a company. There are interesting agreements between New Zealand and Japan, New Zealand and Korea, New Zealand and Singapore that are putting in place the groundwork for these international trade agreements in green energy. But the fuel idea and fuel as we apply it to transport, fuel as we apply it for energy and power, electricity and so on, that's a very important piece to play. And when we look at our mix, we identified that there are areas that are going to be clear electrification, battery electrification is going to be the majority shift. And so in light transport vehicles and urban mobility. As we get to heavier transport needs and longer range needs and equipment that carries higher payloads, has higher service duty required, you need something that can be light, that can get energy and that can potentially go the distance. So that's where hydrogen comes into play with fuels in transport. And interestingly, in that space, you've got some real potential about creating scale in those areas. So hydrogen's got a strong path to play in a sector of transport. At the same time, you have battery electrification. And interestingly, you've also got biofuels to consider. And there's already some global trade starting in biofuels. We see it as a real mix is needed. New Zealand's has got the renewable electricity, it's got the ability to make the green hydrogen, and it's also got the ability to make some biofuels. So it certainly sits as, if you like, a renewable energy rich country. And so how we can help the region decarbonise is definitely high on the agenda. And what can we learn from what we're doing here? We've heard about ammonia, green ammonia. We have a project with our partners where we are building one of the world's first green ammonia projects, where we're building a wind farm co-located with an existing ammonia plant, and we're feeding green hydrogen into that plant to make green ammonia molecules that then are going to be available into fertilizer domestically, but ultimately the same pathway can lead to bringing green ammonia molecules and being zero carbon molecules as well to countries such as Japan. So there's some really exciting areas that we're already starting on, that we can start to expand, learn from countries like New Zealand, and help other parts of the Asia Pacific.
I couldn't agree more. Global climate change doesn't obviously stop on the borders, so it's really important that the countries working together on how we can together decarbonize. And that brings me now to Malaysia. Mr. Looi Ting Hui, would you like to please extend what sort of future fuels do you think have the greatest potential in Malaysia, and what business models do you see coming up, and how can we create some of the, improve some of the value chain?
Right. Thank you, Tina. So if you look at the Malaysian RE mix or renewable energy mix, it shows a significant potential in the investment in the biomass sector. We're talking about biomass, biogas, as well as bio-CNG, or in other words, biomethane. So one of the two main key players for the biogas or biomass industry is actually coming from the oil palm byproducts and also the municipal solid waste, MSW. We're also looking at diversifying to other feedstocks such as rice husk, sugarcane, manure, grass crops, as well as sawdust. But however, let's focus on the key areas, which is the rapid growth of the oil palm plantation industry. It has become a key area where waste can be converted into bioenergy and provides a lot of diversification in terms of value chain downstream. So Malaysia is being the second largest producer of palm oil in the world. According to the latest statistics in 2020, we have about 457 palm oil mills in Malaysia alone. So Indonesia still remains as the first largest producer. So bio-CNG or biomethane application is already proven worldwide globally. It is a more sustainable solution if you compare it with traditional natural gas. And it is important to take note that this transition of fuel on the road is leading to decarbonizing our energy supply. So by enhancing this energy security, by broadening the sources of energy supply, we are also moving towards clean energy development, towards localization and empowerment of distribution generation. So if you look at the value chains of downstream value chain provided by this sector, we can create energy security, job security, reducing greenhouse gases emission. You know, to take note that CH4 or methane is 25 times more potent than CO2 alone. So therefore, creating a biogas capturing facility will also reduce the emission from greenhouse gases. And of course, you can increase the health benefits from air pollution, and also proper waste management implemented to prevent unsustainable agricultural practices. To take note, biofuels such as biogas and also biomethane is also carbon neutral, and is also part of the waste to energy program. So it is important that this biogas and biomethane being implemented could complement the rising variable energy, renewable energy such as solar PVs. So if you look at the future for bio-CNG or biomethane in Malaysia, biogas has to be further purified or upgraded to remove the hydrogen sulfide component, as well as the carbon dioxide component, and further compressed. So it can be utilized as distribution via the virtual pipeline to industrial commercial consumers in transportation, or as well as injection into the natural gas pipeline. Bio-CNG is definitely a green renewable fuel. It's carbon neutral and sulfur free. Globally, it has been widely used in industrial and transportation sector to replace fossil fuel. And we are also looking into exporting some of our production in the form of bio-LNG, bio-liquefied natural gases, to markets in Europe, China, Japan, and Korea. Currently, in 2015, we have actually established and commissioned the world's first bio-CNG plant from palm oil meal waste, and has been supplying to industrial consumers since 2017. So definitely this is one of the clean future fuel that we are looking at in Malaysia, which has a significant potential. Thank you.
Thank you, that sounds very exciting. And now that we have heard the different potentials for different fuels in these different Asia-Pacific countries, obviously it would be also interesting to see how these fuels impact energy security or can help with energy security. I think a lot of countries having to look into similar issues when it comes to the further adaptation of intermittent renewable energies. So with this, we obviously need to think more about storage. Therefore, this question about how might this future fuel impact energy security is a really important one for this discussion. And I would like to get Dr. Ken Cuyama first to answer this question, please.
Okay. Yes. Firstly, that I'd like to agree with the point that Richard made in his first comment, that energy security is vital. And this is really true, of course, to Hong Kong, but also to Japan and for every country, I think. And in terms of energy security, we can recall, many people in Japan can recall that earlier this year, we have a kind of power crisis, and wholesale electricity prices skyrocketed. And also we need to increase the additional procurement of LNG to avoid the power shortage. So I think that the journey towards the carbon neutrality takes a long time, long lead time. And in this process, I think that we may still continue to depend on the existing technology, existing fuels, and we need to protect the energy security during this transitionary period. So my point is that, of course, during this transitionary period, energy security for this traditional fuel like LNG, oil, coal, and everything is very, very important. And during this process, we need to pay attention to other new emerging challenge for energy security, such as we are depending on electricity growingly. That electrification is a keyword. So electricity security of supply will become a very important challenge for every country in the world and every country in this region. And security of electricity supply will see a new emerging challenge such as cybersecurity or the issue related to the intermittent supply of renewable energy. And if we depend, probably Japan will go on the renewable energy option in a great manner. And then we need to ask questions such as the critical mineral and others. And furthermore, I talked about the importance, potential importance of blue hydrogen and blue ammonia based on the establishment of international supply chain. And once this international supply chain can be made, I think that the security of supply of this new fuel will become another important challenge. And of course, we have a long history. Japan has a long history of protecting the energy security for traditional fuel or like oil, but probably the government planner need to pay attention to the new energy security challenge for the new clean fuel. That's a very important long-term aspect of energy security challenge for Japan.
Thank you, Dr. Cuyama. And as we move to more electrification and so more renewables, more electrification in some of the countries, if it comes to industry or transport, obviously the security of supply is becoming just as much important, and the price needs to be lining up as well. Otherwise, there's less incentive for people to electrify. I would like to hand over for the same question to Mr. Lancaster. How does it impact Hong Kong?
It's a very complex subject, as Ken Cuyama has just outlined. There are many aspects to energy security, and I think to put the challenge into some perspective, if you think about what we have to do over the next 30 years between now and 2050, it's basically rebuilding an entirely new electricity grid with all the infrastructure using zero carbon technology. We have to get it all working reliably, working stably, and that is a huge challenge. And if you think that it's already taken us 125 years to get to where we are today, we've got to replace all of that in a quarter of the time. It really highlights how crucial this is to get it right. So an important part of energy security is planning for that, building that security into our designs and into our thinking. We don't have the luxury of time. So technologies that still are at the research stage are just too late for us to be scaling up. So we have to use proven technologies. And we are moving to a world where our energy supply will be far more complex than it's ever been in the past. The days of having centralized power with economies of scale is no longer fit for our future. So we will have much more diversity in our technologies, much more distributed energy supply and energy demand. The technology that we're using will be much more digitalized, which introduces new risks, as as Ken has highlighted, with cybersecurity. So we're managing a much more complex infrastructure than we've ever had to deal with in the past. Now that all sounds very depressing, but the good news is that we have much more sophisticated tools at our disposal. So the technology and innovation that we've seen over the past decade has really enabled us and given us new tools. The cost of these technologies has dropped dramatically as well. So we have access to affordable technologies. So this represents, to my mind, an enormous challenge to see through an energy transition in a carefully planned way that leaves us with an energy supply by 2050 that's not just cobbled together and put together in a rush, but one that we have built purposefully to be secure and to be reliable and to be able to withstand new challenges that we'll see as climate change starts to take effect.
Very well said, Mr. Lancaster. And I took away that it's not so much about economy of scale anymore, because we're looking into diversity. That leads really well in the next question, which is about how to overcome production, supply, and storage barrier, obviously looking through a lens of accessibility and affordability. And here in New Zealand, we are very much focusing on how do we get this done in a just transition way, in a way where everyone can be part of the story. And therefore, I would like to hand over now to Mr. Clennett.
Yeah, so look, really good to pick up straight on the back of what Richard was saying. It's the concept that we are looking at actually at a different system. We have less time to do this. We don't have 150 years in fossil fuels, 125 years in electrification, economy of scale that's being created. We don't have that time. But interestingly, some of these technologies we're looking at, they really do let us create some new business models. They do allow this decentralization, which means that we can have far more places across the world and across a region and across a country and across a city that can produce energy closer to its use. And that's quite an enabler. It needs to go hand in hand, though, with that affordability of that energy. And so what we've seen is, as we look across our country, is I don't need to make it in one place and move it across the country. I can find a source that I can apply to make my green hydrogen, for example, much closer to that market case. But what we still need to do is create this scale, but it's a different form of scale. So it's not that centralized large economy of scale that has been the natural place that many oil and gas companies have viewed hydrogen, but it's actually around just sheer volume, sheer manufacturing volume, getting the cost of the tools and the technologies down. The technologies are ready to go and are ready for commercial scale up. As Richard's saying, the last 10 years has seen incredible leaps and bounds in let's say, new energy technologies, but it's about getting them to scale up and commercializing them properly. And the pace of technology development that we can now capture, if we focus heavily on where are those early commercial supply chains, where are the value chains that can actually be commercial, and when that commerciality happens, that encourages more technology development, because now the market's there for someone to come in with a better idea. One of the best things that we can face is constant disruption, as long as we put the framework in place to allow for that disruption, going back to the planning point that Richard made. So where we look is areas where we can get early price support, recognizing, yes, it's early stage of commercialization. It needs maybe some help, but it will scale very easily. So we go to areas where we can get that commercialization, we can create scale. For example, if we can start with the areas that can afford maybe a slight increase in the cost of freight because of the product that they're moving, be it a higher value product, maybe a 10%, 15%, 20% increase in freight costs might only be a fraction of a percent in the increase in the cost of the product. So where can we apply that? And those vehicles, for example, going to heavy trucking and green hydrogen, one truck is equivalent to 150 cars. So if I can get one truck displaced, I've taken the load of trying to get 150 new cars into the system for people that maybe can't afford an electric car. So focusing where the areas that can apply that early heavy lifting, that will help create the scale up. That will help bring the costs down. And then really from that, you can start to see, okay, that starts to allow the technology to be available to more and more sectors. As we bring the cost down, then it can be applied to broader sectors. And so it can be applied to stationary energy more and more. You know, hydrogen fuel is one of the fuel inputs to replace thermal gas, for example. It can be applied to process heat potentially more as the costs come down. But we can't expect these businesses to suddenly have to adopt to a technology that might be, in that case, maybe 3 to 4 times the cost. But other areas it can take that heavy lifting. So we see there's a strategy about being smart where we go and when we go there, and there's plenty of low-hanging fruit, such as these large industrial chemical opportunities and these heavy transport opportunities that really get you there. And from that, I think, going back to the question about just transition, really from that, we can start to leverage the skills that we have. We create the businesses that can do this sort of work, but we put the burden in the areas that can afford it, and over time we come down. We are very fortunate in our space. We've started our company in the traditional energy region of New Zealand, where we have oil and gas skills to draw from, both within our team and then in the greater companies around us, and seeing those skills being applied to this new technology is really exciting. I mean, we're in our first projects we're a smaller company, but I think we've got probably 150 people already working in these new energy projects with us that come from the conventional sector. So hopefully, that, to me, I'm very optimistic, and we can be smart about this. We can learn from this, and we can get to that scale.
Thank you, Mr. Clennett. That was excellent, and particularly raised the point that a just transition is not necessarily just about the affordability, but how do you actually get people as part of the journey? How do you warm up business models in particular areas? How do you, where do you start, at what timing, and how do you transfer skills this is just as equally as important, and it is about timing. I would like to hand over now to Malaysia, basically to Looi Ting Hui, to let me know what is the sort of challenges you see when it comes to the just transition, and how do you deal with it in Malaysia?
Okay, thank you, Tina. Actually, Dr. Ken, Richard, and Andrew has highlighted many key points, important key points in terms of providing accessible and affordable these clean fuels to all the consumers. So I'll just focus on the biofuel in terms of biogas and bio-CNG or biomethane. So we look at the utilization of these biogases. You can either direct fuel displacement, that means you fire it in a biomass boiler, or after the desulfurization process, you through electrification process, through using a biogas engine generator or a turbine generator with 40% efficiency, you can provide electricity in urban or rural areas or export it to the utility grid. So in Malaysia, there's actually a regulator for renewable energy, which is the Sustainable Energy Development Authority. In short, it's called SEDA. So they have developed the FIT mechanism, the feed-in tariff mechanism, for the export of electricity to the national grid. So this is actually very well established. This scheme is very well established. We have worked on quite a number of projects in this. Now that's why now we are looking at upgrading the biogas through usage of bio-CNG and biomethane. Now, if you look at the barriers that we have for bio-CNG and biomethane, aside from the electrification process, there are also challenges coming from low oil and gas prices, as well as energy costs in Malaysia, which is still relatively low. So bio-CNG and biomethane, one of the issues is also logistics, because palm oil mills are located very remotely. They are normally located in plantation areas, quite far away from urban areas. So therefore, these gases have to be collected and taken to a distant collection and processing point before they can be sent to the consumers. And another barrier is the lack of subsidies for biogas upgrading facilities to enable an investment of technology. Therefore, we have to look into promoting a lot of awareness to the industry, to the public, as well as financial institutions, okay, to increase the incentive as well as the development of bio-CNG and biomethane projects. Now, we can also look into scaling up bio-CNG or biomethane production on gas network, which require gas supplies. by making it more decentralized. So this will reduce the reliance on large-scale production as well as storage. And we can actually leverage on energy storage potential from the gas infrastructure itself. So bio-CNG and biomethane can actually be used to meet the it is flexible to meet the peak demand for this infrastructure. And my last word is the gas grid would definitely need to accommodate the growth of supply at the distribution level for biomethane and bio-CNG distribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It sounds like that gas seems to be still as part of a transition fuel in Malaysia to help enabling the future fuels as well, and including the infrastructure, which is probably similar here in New Zealand as well, that we need to understand of that some of the infrastructure that we're currently using for the likes of gas will be vital going forward as well, and actually helping us with the transition. So now, thank you so much for the interesting insights of all these questions we had. We're actually coming already to our last round of questions, and that goes again to everyone. What policies do you think are needed to address the uptake of clean fuels? And that is actually something I want to use to connect it with your final remarks, because it's a nice way to finish. What has to happen from a policy perspective to further enable the implementation of clean fuels? And of course, I have to start with Dr. Ken Cuyama, who is definitely an expert in energy policy and energy economics.
Thank you, Tina, for your great question. Of course, firstly, I'd like to emphasize that even if we try to develop the clean fuel or clean energy option, market mechanism or market function should be best utilized. But at the same time, I would like to point out that the climate change and energy security is a fundamentally market externalities. And by definition, government need to play a very important role to solve this properly. And as energy issue, including the clean fuel issue, as a multi-dimensional challenge, which means that the energy policy need to address from various different angles, like economic policy, industrial policy, technology policy, educational and social policy, and in some part the international policies. So I think that the energy policy need to be very comprehensive. So that every respective government need to take into account of this multi-dimensional and comprehensiveness when we build a very good and resilient energy policy, including a policy to develop a clean fuel or a clean option. And also, I would like to point out that a kind of international cooperation is very, very important to address this important topic of carbon neutrality or energy security, because this relates to the kind of global interest. And if we can sufficiently develop a very good international cooperation, probably that the transitional cost can be minimized. So I think that this should be the very important element to be considered for the energy policy, not only for Japan, probably for Hong Kong or New Zealand or Malaysia or whatever country in this region or in the world. And finally, to address that, for example, carbon neutrality or the environmental issue, I think that the behavioral change of the people or citizens is a very important element to be addressed. Again, this is an area that the government need to play a role. Of course, that the behavioral change can be moved by ourselves, but for example, from the social development or education, government can play a very significant role to contribute to promote the clean energy system or energy security enhancement. So I'd like to finish with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lancaster, what would you want to add to this already very rich comment and very helpful comment around energy policy?
No, that was a great comment and a great summary of the important considerations for policy. I would perhaps expand on a couple of points. International cooperation, absolutely important, and that is going to be vital for us all to achieve the energy transition in an optimal way. Collaboration and cooperation between governments and the business sector will also be important. The ideal would be to have very comprehensive policies and leave the markets to achieve those policy outcomes in the most efficient way. But given the complexity of the energy transition, I think there will be a need for bilateral discussions between governments and industry so that we can come up quickly with solutions and move forward with a sense of urgency. So collaboration between governments and businesses internationally, as well as international government cooperation, I think all of that is really coming down to perhaps an important message that collaboration is going to be absolutely key to achieving the energy transition in time and as efficiently as we can.
Very well said, Mr. Lancaster. And this is something we preach in New Zealand. Collaboration is slower, but it is key to get further. Actually, now want to hand over for final remarks to Andrew Clennett.
Yeah, thanks. Really second the points made already here, and I think maybe looking at it through the lens from both a country lens and international lens, I think it is really important. Now, it's clear that governments will have a role to play here, because the externality factor of climate change doesn't naturally fit in, if you like, the affordability security part of the energy trilemma sector, which is what market forces typically do best address, shall we say. So we've also got to recognise that the pace that we need to achieve, market forces took 150 years for oil and gas to reach its pinnacle. It's taken a long time, although it probably got there a bit earlier. We've only got to look at history, but it takes some time. So how do we accelerate that? We've got to identify that things like carbon taxes and so on, these sort of policy settings are really good in creating a steady state and steering the ship in the right direction. But there are some hurdles for these early technologies that carbon, things like carbon pricing is going to be a much weaker mechanism. You need to be more focused. You need to understand these technologies. We're strong believers in the technology toolkit and how can you get the toolkit working. And so you need to know specific points and pressure points that you can apply, and you need to apply those to a broad range of technologies, but recognize they might need to be slightly different mechanisms applied. I think that the other thing that we need to look at is how do we get beyond the government's work? I think the banks is a really good example. We've seen in our projects a real increase in banking support, and you can see the banks putting pressure. In a way, the banks sort of reflect a degree of democratization, because they are, banks as well as being financial banks, they are often, taking someone's personal savings, so that they're under scrutiny. And what we're starting to see is that the ethical investments coming through for the banks is starting to change the way companies react and boards react. And I think that's very promising. So there's almost a behavioral change coming through from the financial markets. Going back to that international policy, though, I think is vital, that we recognise there's no point in being perfect in a country if you end up shifting the problem elsewhere. So we need to look at this collectively. One thing that is dangerous, the concept of carbon leakage, the concept of we're not going to have this dirty industry in my backyard because we're being held accountable as a country. But in fact, that industry might be far cleaner if it's running off a high proportion of renewable electricity or so on and so forth. So we need to have a look at what we are doing in our countries through that global lens. Where are the best places to produce aluminium globally? Where are the best places to produce steel? Some of those questions we need to start to need to start to ask ourselves, and therefore, what are the policy settings that allow that? Making sure we've got traceability of the origin of our energy. That's going to become more and more vital, that we can trace a green ammonia molecule, for example, or a green hydrogen molecule, or a blue molecule. So look, I think there's work to be done. There's work to be done across the region. There's work to be done globally. There's plenty of good work going on already in the various countries, and already in what we've seen with the World Energy Council and some of these other APAC initiatives that are really starting to get the conversation happening. So again, I'm optimistic. We can see governments really starting to shift. We can see the finance sector starting to shift, and we're seeing companies starting to shift. And in fact, yes, the behavioural change from humans, but that's the hardest change of all. So, you know, to get humans to change. So in fact, if we can help humans change by providing the right environment.
Thank you, Mr. Clennett. We have to wrap up the session now quite soon. So I would like to hand over for a final comment you want to make from Malaysia, actually, Looi Ting Huey. What would be to add to this conversation in regards to policy needed?
Thank you very much, Tina. If you look at the policies and what are things that we need to address, firstly, we need to ensure that there's actually abundance of feedstock. It's always a supply and demand. We need to support the supply part as well as the consumption part. And generally, if we look at biogas or biomethane, they are more expensive than natural gas. Therefore, it actually falls back to economies of scale. Volume is still very important, like what Richard and Dr. Ken has keep on mentioning, economies of scale. And the government also needs to support the competitiveness of biogas and bio-CNG if you compare it with other fossil fuel sources and the pricing mechanism. So we need to look into implementing a holistic approach, coordinated policy, not only agricultural practice, but also waste management, energy, transport, utility infrastructure. So all this has to come together to actually deliver an integrated approach to develop this bioenergy sector. So other than that, we need to also look into introducing centralized waste management policies and regulate to enhance the collection of these feedstocks in urban or rural areas. And one of the key points is actually to look into monitoring and measuring the greenhouse gases emission as part of the requirement for the development of large-scale biogas or bio-CNG product facilities. So we also need to look into capacity building, okay, which creates the industry jobs, and also look into providing the competency and training program for this industry. And not only that, we also have to look into providing bio-CNG to be accorded as the RE status under the Renewable Energy Transition Roadmap. And of course, one of the key areas to increase the consumption for bio-CNG and biomethane is to enhance the development of gas infrastructure along key road corridors, and also to look into the development and adoption of biogas and bio-CNG standards and guidelines to be used and adopted in the construction of these facilities. And last but not least, we also need to look into establishing key target areas or statistics figures for biogas and bio-CNG production, as well as generation and injection. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, speakers, and thank you, audience, for joining us and listening. And I hope we can continue these conversations. They're actually really important, and they're probably actually the best way in assisting us for further development of clean fuel business models and global supply change, because obviously we get together and share ideas and hopefully doing projects together. That is the potential outcome of sessions like that. And that will help us to collaborate and to move towards a low carbon economy jointly. In that regard, I wish you all well, and I hope you have fun with the next session. Goodbye.
again, great to see you. What a great session that was there, looking at the future fuels that are out there, looking at the possibilities, looking at the projects that are already in place, and indeed, more importantly, looking what needs to be done. I think without a doubt here, looking at that perspective from Asia and from Asia Pacific, what we really saw here was, I think, without a doubt, an agreement on the journey that is ahead of us, the journey of decarbonization. And again, the fact, I think, emphasizing that it is a journey. I'm going to reflect on some of those points for you, just to remind you what we saw there. One of the key areas, I think, without a doubt, speed is of the essence. I think we heard that from all of our panel members there. And really, I think, but, tremendous optimism in the fact that so much has been done in different countries in the region, without a doubt. The costs are coming down, so this is going to allow a lot more people into the industry. It's going to allow people to scale up, and this ultimately is what's going to create a win-win. Again, it's about that eventual journey to net zero, and I think everybody there agreed this is a global problem that's certainly going to need a global solution, and everybody wants to be part of it. Also, we have to be looking at finance, banking, and human behavior. Interesting there how it comes down to that, because at the moment it is the consumer in many ways that's driving that demand, and in many ways that has to change. Let me just reflect on a few of the areas there. I was fascinated, by Mr. Looi Huey from Malaysia there. Again, he agreeing very much that we're looking at, a trilemma, and this is something I know Angela Wilkinson has talked a lot about at the World Energy Council, that it really is, it's not a dilemma anymore. It is the trilemma that we really, really need to be looking at. We have a lot of challenges there. And one of the key challenges, as he said, in Malaysia, we're looking at demand growth that's very unpredictable. So again, when this is an issue, this is also an issue for suppliers, it's an issue for producers. They're looking at the public policy, they're looking at investment, all of these issues, so it's tough in many ways. But I think where he was very encouraged to was telling us where we looked at renewable energy in terms of Malaysia right now, where we're looking at about 22%, was their target by 2025. They've actually upped that now to 30%. So the fact that they can make these predictions, I think, is very, very encouraging. And it's something that we look at a country like Malaysia, very much dependent on hydrocarbons as well at the moment, but they're really making great strides. He talked a lot about the grid system operator and the fact that they're now really looking at putting a big study in place in terms of what they're going to do, because coal and gas at the moment is still making up 39% of energy use in Malaysia. So on the agenda, of course, I think like everywhere in Asia too, is that reduction in coal-fired power plants. I think that's absolutely essential. And he agreed this is something that they want to move away from. And indeed, they're aggressively doing this right now. Looking at hydro, solar, bioenergy as well on the cards there. And again, being very, very encouraged where he said, recent, particularly for solar, the lowest bid that's come down is 0.17 cents. So when we see those price come down so low, without a doubt, this is great encouragement for being able to actually deliver projects. One of the other areas they're looking at, and we heard this from many of the people as well, ammonia certainly being produced right now, but again, dependent on natural gas at the moment, but that time is come to diversify. One of the areas there also, we heard it not just from Malaysia, we heard it also from Japan, talking about energy security, absolutely essential. This is something that, we all have to look around the world, and I think it's a bigger issue when we look in the longer term at the green hydrogen economy. And, this was something that our colleague from Japan brought up to the fact that it will bring its own energy security issues, but something that everybody needs to be looking at. One area too in Malaysia, very, very important, is bio-CNG and indeed bio-LNG. And they're looking actually at eventually putting this on the export market. But a few challenges there in terms of geography, access to the feedstock, all of that. This is something that, costs money, costs time, but they really see a great use, particularly industrial use for bio-CNG in the longer term. Ease of access to the feedstock, again, something that is very, very important. And again, needing abundance of the feedstock. I think that's what it is. When you look at energy demand and you look at turning it around in terms of renewable supply, we have to make sure that there's a lot there. Our colleague in New Zealand, and only yesterday we had the energy minister on to, you know, talking a lot about the great work that's been happening in New Zealand. And if anything, as he said, you know, right now they're looking at 85% renewable in the electricity system right now. You know, there's still a hydrocarbon importer. They will continue to be. And again, I think there was a lovely sense of realism among many people in the panel that this is the transition, and there also has to be energy security within and throughout the transition. We can't just turn the lights off today and as we all head towards, you know, a greener future. We are heading there. It's a journey. We're definitely getting there. But in the meantime, we also have to make sure that there is energy security right now to make sure that this transition is possible. Very bold targets there, as Andrew said, from New Zealand, looking at wanting to be 100% renewable by 2030. But again, a lot in place there to make sure that they're getting there. About 60% hydro, wind, and geothermal right now. So a lot of interesting projects going on there. But so 100% renewable by 2030, but again, carbon neutrality by 2050. And Andrew was saying they're very much on target. Looking at biofuels, certainly this is some area that they're looking at. And again, big focus on hydrogen. I think we heard that from many of our speakers. They're also talking about, you know, the ultimate journey and the destination is to get to green hydrogen. And we're going to have a great panel on that later on today. Arthur is going to moderate that panel. But again, in the meantime, it's about starting, I think, the hydrogen economy, so to speak. And right now, definitely people are looking at blue hydrogen and looking at hydrogen from gas, but you know, it depends. I mean, I think again, you know, the jury is out in terms of where this wants to go, but it has to be probably blue hydrogen right now, and definitely we're going to get there, you know, later. One of the other areas, of course, New Zealand been a big agricultural player. Andrew mentioned too that it's not just emissions, you know, from energy and, you know, consumer use of energy we're looking at too, but also that they're taking very, very seriously the emissions coming from agriculture. Very, very important that they do that. But again, he said they're not going to work in isolation. They're looking at trade agreements that they have in place in terms of energy with Japan, with Korea and Singapore. And indeed, all of these countries will benefit from this as well. So it's a win-win situation for all the countries in place. Where are the key areas for these future fuels? Transportation, without a doubt, the electrification of transportation. And that's happening already when it comes to consumer transportation. So that's an easy win, I suppose, in the short term. But in the longer term, really looking at heavy industrialized transportation, that's where we're going to see possible more uses for hydrogen. And that's what he said as they look at it. And even at the moment, there's a green ammonia plant in place, wind green ammonia plant in progress right now. So I love the fact that there are projects in place. And while they're regional projects, they're localized projects, they're maybe smaller projects, it's about getting them in place and eventually scaling up. And this was a theme we heard right throughout from so many people that, you know, we're going to see this decentralization. We're going to see energy available more regionally, locally. But right now we're seeing a lot of these operations starting. Decentralization, of course, that will also create the new business models and the new opportunities, I think, without a doubt. But it's about starting this and then building scale. And ultimately, in the longer term, we need to be looking at greater regional cooperation, sharing that grid in many areas, and also looking eventually at international cooperation. I think a strong message that came for everybody. Richard Lancaster from Hong Kong there talked again about, you know, when we look at Hong Kong, and for those of us who have visited, yes, geographically, it's limited in size and scope. They can't really expand it. So there's a few different challenges, as he pointed out. And I think very interesting too, as he said, it just means that people have to be more creative and people have to be more innovative. At one area, yes, there's possibilities for wind projects, but at times it's not the windiest city in the world either. So they're really looking at what they need. And again, I thought what Richard really pointed out is when we look at the electricity system we have in place around the world, we look at the grid that's there, it took us more than 100 years to get there. We now have to overturn the situation really in the next 30 years. And the process has certainly begun, but it's going to be a lot quicker. And there's no time here. There's no time for errors. There's no time And he even said, when we look at, if you're looking at new technologies right now, there's possibly not a whole lot of time to bring them on board. We have to be looking at what we know, what we can do. Hydrogen, without a doubt, everybody is looking at that. But one of the key areas that Richard emphasized is that planning, good policy planning, good government planning, good industrial planning, good project planning, all of this is absolutely essential if we want to actually get it right, because we don't have the luxury of time and we have to move probably a lot faster, because ultimately it's a very complex energy system that is out there. It's complex on the supply side, it's complex on the demand side, and the consumer is going to ultimately want more energy. They are concerned about where they're getting it. We're beginning to see that, the traceability in terms of their demand, where's this energy coming from? And that too is driving, I think, the new decisions. But at the same time, it's very, very important that we get it right. Richard also, as he said, technology is certainly helping to move the progress and to deliver the projects, at a quicker and faster time. The cost is dropping, all of that good news, because there's a lot of potential, a lot of new infrastructure that needs to be put in place there. And ultimately, as he said, it has to be done right, and it has to be done from the beginning well. Let's shift over to Japan and, listen to what Ken Cuyama was talking about as well. And really one of the key areas, as he said, energy security is absolutely top of the agenda. They learned a lesson there a while ago when they had, they suffered almost blackouts. And again, that cost of energy that was skyrocketing. No country wants to counter situations like that. And Ken made it very, very clear too, that, as we go through and we head, towards our destination, the energy transition needs funding as it goes. Definitely the end projects in terms of what we're going to use and the transition and the infrastructure, that's all happening. But it's also about delivering cleaner fuel right now. And it's also about making sure that the hydrocarbons that we have in place are actually cleaner and delivering. Some very ambitious plans, of course, for Japan. He highlighted there, as he said, the reduction in greenhouse gas when they head to 2030. They were hoping for 26, and they have upped that recently as well. So very, very encouraging news coming out of Japan, whereby that they're now hoping, and their new target is 46%. So 46% that they get there. And again, they're holding on to the 2050 target as well to be carbon neutral. So all of that is going to demand new fuels and going to demand a variety of new fuels. So I think that's also, when we look at the possibilities that's out there when it comes to business, when it comes to what's going to be on the market, there are several out there. So there's tremendous opportunities here. Offshore wind still in Japan, a real possibility, but they're working very much on ammonia and hydrogen as we speak as well. And as he said, it can be green, it will be green, but for the moment too, it can be blue, and it is about, moving towards there. Japan also looking still at nuclear, and he said it's still important for Japan, energy, the security side of it, without a doubt, and also bringing the population on board. So they haven't written that off by any means too. But again, putting the infrastructure in place, making sure it's a secure infrastructure, a safe infrastructure, and making sure that everybody wins in this without a doubt. So really, there's a whole lot going on here when we look at what happens, without a doubt, everybody agreeing that we really need to decarbonize, electricity as we see it, and the many options that are out there are absolutely, essential. The opportunities are there, and, we all, I think, have to look at that. But we also have to look at this, from what I'm hearing too, and what I'm hearing from all of our speakers there, this has to be regional, it has to be global, and nobody can work in isolation. And I think a very, very strong call there, for policy, really looking at what do we do, and also joined up policy. Without a doubt, every region, every country has to have their own policy in place, but then it's time to widen that discussion, and it's time to widen that discussion with governments, with industries, with the financiers, with the banks. Everybody has to be part of that discussion, and also, with civil society and bringing the consumer into this, because the consumer is driving demand, and ultimately, the consumer is putting pressure on. But the supply has to be there, security of supply has to be there, and we also need to keep in mind cybersecurity as everybody looks forward, because looking ahead to, you know, the new future and the new future of future fuels, we are going to have their own challenges. So planning and focus, without a doubt, it's all very essential. I think ultimately everybody talked about this has to be a just transition. And we hear this phrase time and time again. And it's very, very healthy that everybody is coming on board, insisting that this happen. Nobody really can be left behind, so to speak. You know, we're very, very encouraged. Those costs are coming down. There's tremendous benefits for a lot of people. There's tremendous benefits for industry. There are new jobs, a new economy, a new green economy, a new future. All of this is being created, and everybody can benefit, and we can benefit with this around the world. We do, without a doubt, I think everybody agree, need more resilient energy policies. This is something that's absolutely essential. And again, you know, a bit of pressure on governments and policymakers there to make sure that these are resilient policies, and therefore investment decisions can be made, and ultimately the supply can be put out there. Gas, of course, a very, very important topic of conversation there, and gas absolutely essential to this transition. I believe we heard that from everybody. Yes, we're moving in one direction, but gas is going to facilitate a lot, and ultimately as we get to hydrogen. Now, everybody talked a lot about gas, about hydrogen, and it is topics of conversation at this World Energy Week. And later today, we're going to have, not too long from now, we're looking at gas, we're looking at hydrogen. We have really in-depth discussions on that for you. So we're going to continue our conversation. We're going to have a quick break at the moment, and we'll be back very shortly at 8 o'clock UK time, so not too long. We're going to look at the role of gas, the energy transition, and particularly the role of gas in Russia and in Kazakhstan. So we're going to be heading over to Kazakhstan, to Nur Sultan, and Chokan, my colleague, is going to join us for the first plenary from there. So he's going to lead us into that. And the first session, of course, will be moderated by the chairman of the Russian Kazakhstan Business Council and also the president of the Energy Innovation Association of Innovative Enterprises in the energy sector, and that will be Mikhail Smirnov. So Chokan will be back with us. He'll introduce Mikhail. We'll talk about gas and get you prepared for a lot more, but it will be 8 o'clock UK time. So stay with us here on World Energy Week. We're so happy to have you, and I hope we're adding great value to your day. For me, Ethna Trainer, I'll come back later in the day. Thanks so much.